So I'm with the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, which in a real big nutshell is we bring all the communities in Northwest Indiana, which for us is 3 counties all along the southern shore of Lake Michigan, all together in one place to talk about things that are bigger than any one of them. That's really it in a nutshell. More than that, though, we also have the designation of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So if you're familiar and from Chicago, and you know the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, we're the same equivalent just over the state line. But here's the thing, is when I worked for CMAP, and most of my career's been around the Chicago area, not in Northwest Indiana. I'm ashamed to admit this now, but we didn't think a whole lot about what was happening on the state line. You know, now I'm intimately involved with what's happening there, but it was just it was another state. We didn't really think about it. I found out consequently that folks in Indianapolis or downstate Indiana don't really think about Northwest Indiana because they all say, well, that's Chicago. That's so different from the rest of the state. So we got overlooked by everybody. But now that's starting to change. What happens is when people drive through the tollway, they don't get off the tollway to realize that we have areas like this, including the Indiana Dunes National Park, which is, I kid you not, the 4th most visited national park in the country. That's higher than Yellowstone and higher than Yosemite. So there are 4 million visitors that are going to that park every year. And the reason for that is because people can make that trip as a whim from Chicago versus, you know, a big vacation and a big endeavor to get out there to go to Yellowstone or Yosemite. So I hope this works from somewhere around here. Is there a place? There we go. So just to dwell on this for a minute, I'm going to encourage you to read this story, which is why I put this QR code up there, because if you scan that and go to that story, ProPublica did a piece that put us in the national news, which is not the focus of my presentation, but it's leading to what I do want to talk about, which is we are, just like Indiana likes to call itself, the crossroads of America. We have a little just shy of 1,000 at-grade rail crossings in Northwest Indiana. And we have been trying to talk about this issue for a long time in some of our communities like Gary and Hammond. This happens to be from Hammond, Indiana, where what's happening is ever since this Indiana Supreme Court struck down the ability of municipalities to ticket trains that are blocking a rail crossing longer than 10 minutes, we suddenly saw this huge uptick where rail is blocking intersections for hours, if not days at a time. And when the ProPublica folks actually went out there and filmed these kids literally crossing train couplings just to get to school on the other side of the rail crossing because they couldn't get around any other way, and their parents are literally helping them to get across the couplings and under it and everything else, not knowing when that train is going to start up again at any second. And ProPublica did a great job on filming this, and there's a whole video piece that goes with that. So I'm just kind of setting the stage for what we do have here. This is the number of rail crossings in Northwest Indiana, like I said, just under 1,000. And this is our study of trying to map those at places that are close to hospitals, schools, fire departments, et cetera, and where the biggest problems are. As we talk to our congressional legislation, the only way to try to tackle this problem is through Congress. It's a federal preemption issue because of the railroads going back to the mid-1800s and whenever. And so there's no other way to deal with this than congressional action. We can't protect these kids in any other way than trying to solve this problem. And if you're not from here, I guarantee it's probably happening in your community, and so I just want to draw attention to that. So as I move into the crossroads of America and all those rail crossings, what we're trying to do is take advantage of all that infrastructure that we do have and leverage those assets, which is just what Patrick talked about as well. And I'm actually going to make a connection to South Bend here coming up very soon. So what I'm going to talk about just in this time together here is the Marquette Greenway, which is a 60-mile trail that connects Chicago to New Buffalo, Michigan, that we just received a $17.8 million RAISE grant from. For those keeping score, that used to be Tiger, then it was Build, then it's RAISE. And I'm also going to talk about the improvement of commuter rail through our region and how that's shaving a half hour off of most train trips and what's happening along those station locations with transit-oriented development. And then wrap that up with a proposal to try to, and this ties in with Patrick was talking about as well, try to take advantage of hidden fiber within these corridors to develop a quantum computing corridor all the way out to South Bend. So that's what I'm going to talk about in very short short order. So here's the Marquette Greenway, like I said, about 60 miles total length. Some of it is already built, but the grant we received is to patch those pieces and make it continuous. Crosses 3 states, and this is how excited the folks in Southwest Michigan are. They just raised $400,000 of private just contributions to try to make this happen. They're so excited to have this trail in. Chicago already did its piece to connect to the state line, but we're filling in the blanks along this entire length. And if you're familiar with the Beltline in Atlanta and how that has spurred development all around the city of Atlanta, including, as I've personally seen, restaurants that chose to leave their road locations and locate along the trail for that kind of activity. That's what we're looking at here with this kind of investment. The communities all along that corridor are trying to figure out how to activate their places to the trail, with the exception of just one of our beachfront communities, who I guess shall remain nameless, don't want the trail coming through their community because they don't know what it's going to bring into their community. But I guarantee once that trail goes in, just like what happened if you're from here, if you're familiar with the Prairie Path in DuPage County, just west of Chicago, same kind of arguments for some people there. Once that trail's in, now you'd be hard-pressed to find any home for sale in any proximity to that trail that's not trying to advertise their location as part of the selling point for their home, and the exact same thing's going to happen here. I don't know if I'm doing this or some mysterious person is changing it, but thank you for advancing. If watching my thumb, that's kind of miraculous. So here's the raise grant again, $17.8 million with an estimated project cost of about $31 million. And again, I don't know what I'm doing. Should I be somewhere else to click this or good? Okay, great. So one more click. All right, so there's the trail as it winds its way through our region. Those green areas, and this is the issue with the Indiana Dunes National Park, if you're not familiar with it. It was the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore up until during the Obama administration. One of our congressmen changed it into National Park, and that just skyrocketed visitorship because everybody wants to get their passport book stamped at a national park. And as the superintendent says for the park, we didn't really need to do anything but change signs. It's really the same park, but that's all national land. If you drive through Northwest Indiana, there's this perception of disinvestment, and some of the communities really are struggling, like Gary, Hammond, East Chicago, Michigan City. But the steel mills are just producing just as much steel as always. They're just doing it with a lot less people. So that resulted in the disinvestment that Gary is experiencing. But we're still churning out more steel than anywhere else in the United States. So that industry is still very much alive. The trail, when it is activated, is going to look like this. I just threw some shots of existing segments of the Marquette Greenway. So we're talking about a high-quality trail along the entire length of Indiana. And most people don't know that there's a coastline in Indiana. But there is, and this access is a good part of that park to be able to get there. Here's the project schedule. Don't expect you to read this, but it literally takes us out to 2028 before all those pieces are done. We've got a project manager hired that is going to work with all the communities to make this happen. This is unique for us because we are typically, as an MPO, we are connecting communities to federal funds. We recently had over $1.5 billion with a B in projects over 4 years. Now we're the direct recipient, so this is a little bit new ball game for us. But I did want to show you this as well, because the trail is on here, or will be. If I can go to the next deal, we've just released an app that you can see the entire trail network through that. It's called Calumet Greenways and Blueways, and there's a QR code for you to scan to download it for free right now. So you can go out and experience the trails anytime you want to. That app's still getting refined, but it's that map has been so popular, especially during COVID, for our trail network. We had 13 miles of paved trail in 1990. We now have over 200 miles of paved trail in Northwest Indiana. And this is going to segue into the next thing I talk about, is that we worked with the South Shore Commuting Line to finally allow bikes on trains. I think they only allow it on the weekend. But now you can take your bike out of the city and experience the trails in the dunes, or vice versa. People can bring their bikes into the city on the train. So again, going back to look for Calumet Greenways and Blueways if you didn't get the QR code. So same map that you saw before, but I'm going to focus on, so that green line is the Marquette Greenway, the yellow line is the Indiana Tollway, the South Shore line is the orange line, which is appropriate because the trains are orange. If you've seen them run through Millennium Station, they follow the same lines as the IC here in Chicago. And they go all the way to South Bend. So we have the only commuter rail line in Indiana, but the problem with it is that in many portions in our region, it's single tracked and they share it with freight. So they can't get the same kind of speeds. And I think I looked at the attendee list. I think there's quite a few folks from Metra here. We can't get speeds competitive from Metra. Nobody currently really takes the South Shore commuter rail line for speed. They do it for convenience. They want to do other things on the train. They don't want to mess with parking in the city. The parking is free at all the stations in Southwest Indiana, or Northwest Indiana, so go figure. But nobody does it for. But what's happening now is that we've received a huge grant from the Federal Transit Administration, plus a lot of money from the state through a grant incentive program that they developed for regions, plus a continual allotment from the Indiana General Assembly to double track the South Shore line. Some of you are familiar with this project already. So this is underway as we speak. If you go out to Michigan City, if you go out to the Miller section of Gary, if you look in a portion of Hammond where there's a big connection point, it's unbelievable. Michigan City completely blows me away. If you've not been there anytime recently, it's worth checking out what they are doing. Multifamily development is happening already along that trail line. They've cleared the land to activate transit-oriented development. So that is happening, as well as a new rail line that comes to the south, and I'll show that on another slide in a minute, but it goes all the way again out to South Bend. This is the station locations. The Indiana General Assembly not only approved the money to help incentivize, not just incentivize, but fund the double track in the South Shore line, but they developed transit districts, approved these on each of the station locations on both the South Shore line going out to South Bend, and then also, as you see, Ridge Road, Main Street down here, that's through Munster and Dyer, right along the Illinois-Indiana border. And so it's like tax increment financing, or TIF, to incentivize the creation of walkable communities. We have a lot of price point housing in Northwest Indiana. You can get anything along a spectrum, but we don't have a lot of housing types. And there's a whole lot of neighborhood type development that's more walkable, that is more active, that is more vibrant, that some of the communities are doing great at revitalizing. Crown Point, Valparaiso, but not everywhere. And this will go a long way towards activating these station locations and taking these communities to the next level. As one example, here's Hammond. Hammond hired a planner called Jeff Speck, who's very active in the Congress for New Urbanism, did a intensive charrette in downtown Hammond. And this plan was just awarded by the Congress for New Urbanism, where I just was in Charlotte just not too long ago. And these some examples of the renderings of that plan where they are transforming Hammond. If you look at this section right here, this is Homan, which looks nothing like that now. Hammond used to be very vibrant, was the inspiration for Christmas Story. Gene Shepard, that wrote the original for that, was from Hammond. So this is what he was thinking of when he was doing all these department stores and everything. But that's a street that I just pointed out, Homan. This is from Lancaster, California, very similar type of street, land configuration. And inspiration for that is this development on the right, which they transformed that street into. And the multiplier, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's huge. What it costs them to do that versus what it's generating in economic development is astronomical. And that's exactly the same process for Hammond. So that's the rendering for what that street will look like in Homan to do the same thing. One of those station locations is going to locate right within a walkable distance from downtown Hammond. That's a rendering for some of that. And here's just the chart of economic projection for each of those station locations for $2.7 billion in projected TOD investment due to these rail projects over the course of till 2041. Due to the economist's projections. So a lot is happening out there, and I'd really recommend that you go out and see it. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is we've talked about the Marquette Greenway and active transportation for pedestrians and cyclists. We've talked about commuter rail, accessing the jobs in Chicago from Northwest Indiana, and then finally the idea for high-speed quantum communications. And we have a huge amount of fiber that's in that tollway and also in the South Shore line right-of-way. That's not not being utilized, and yet it sits right here by Chicago at 300 East Cermak, so just on the south side of Chicago here, one of the major internet hubs where most internet traffic is routed and goes through. So major location for data. There's already a data center that took advantage of a old generating station right on the border, right in the corner where you see where it says like East Chicago up in there, although it's actually Hammond, the digital crossroads data center, which is doing very, very well. So the idea is to connect this entire corridor all the way out to South Bend, as it says there, 90 miles, to activate that for quantum high-speed communications and build off of that for further economic development in this region. So again, there's the line out to South Bend. You can see the Tollway and the South Shore line in that graphic. This is Gil Smith Architects did this. I'm not claiming any credit for this, and actually credit Gil Smith for the regional graphics there as well, and MKSK for the Trans-Rhodian development component of it. But I just thought this was kind of cool that they did look in terms of geography to look at the Research Triangle in North Carolina and how that fits two research triangles within Northwest Indiana with a similar configuration of communities. And also for Silicon Valley, the geography just happens to about match San Francisco and Silicon Valley and Chicago and Northwest Indiana. That's Valparaiso on the far east and Crown Point to the south. So again, just trying to imagine what this kind of investment with this high-speed computing could actually accomplish. So it's always helpful to look at things from a different perspective. We tend to look at the straight on north being up and all the rest. But again, we're really looking at this as a cross-regional project. All three of those things are cross-regional and multi-state and involve a whole lot of players from the federal government to the state governments to the individual municipalities to the regional planning agencies along each of those areas. And just so you can sleep good at night, because I think it's comforting. We have an agreement as a regional planning organization for Northwest Indiana with Southwestern Michigan, with CMAP, the Chicago area, and also for Southeast Wisconsin, where the executive directors of those agencies, we get together informally several times a year to talk about this kind of stuff on the bigger level, to make sure that we're actually trying to maximize value from connecting these regions and taking advantage of that more mega scale of economic development resulting from these projects. So that's what I've got to say. Those are the three projects. If you need more details of them, that's the QR code for our website, which is just nirpc.org, NIRPC, Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission. You can find more information there, as well as some other things that we are working on. And as was said earlier, if you've got any other questions or anything, I'd be glad to take them out in the hallway or whatever you'd like to track me down. So come out and see us, and come be one of those visitors in that, one of the 4 million visitors out to the Indiana Dunes National Park. It's worth the trip. Thanks, Ken.